Every now and then in your life, something happens. And the thing about when it happens, you have to be open to that. I was sitting in a restaurant. I was sitting on a bench. I was waiting for my wife to have dinner. And I was a little bit depressed because I didn't like Intel and I was looking for the next adventure in my life. And sitting next to me all of a sudden was a young guy who was about 25 years old. And I was reading a newspaper. And in the paper I was looking at an article about IBM, about the computer industry. And this guy said, "Do you know anything about computers?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. I've been in the computer industry. I'm a software engineer by trade, and so I understand computers very well." He said, "Well, my name is Steve Jobs." And he said, "I have a company called Apple Computer." And I'd never heard of either one of them. So I said, "Well, that's nice. But here's this kid, 25 years old, scruffy looking, in Levi's, in a white t-shirt." And I said, "I really don't know who you are, but I'll listen to you." So then we started engaging in a conversation about sort of the world, where everything was going to go. We talked about sort of this ability to move information down to the individual at a desktop. And then he talked about his Apple company was building computers to be able to do that. So we ended up in this conversation, and he said, "You know, I really would like you to come work for me." And I said, "But I don't know you." And he said, "Well, I think that I really like you." And I was really enthralled by his enthusiasm and the way he presented everything. It was sort of the beginning of an adventure. But the more interesting thing about that meeting was the way we looked. What we really connected on is I was as hippie looking as he was. And at that time, I was a executive from IBM. I was an executive from Intel, and you can tell that, however, I didn't look like the normal executive in Silicon Valley. I was really more thought about where I wanted to go, and I didn't believe that appearance had any importance to me. Now, the other interesting thing about Steve Jobs in those days, he always wore white shirts. He wore Levi's and white shirts and Birkenstock, and ultimately in his life, later on, he changed who he looked like. So that was the beginning. And I think what's important about this beginning is being open. And my advice to all of you, and this is what Steve was about, is you always look for that next opportunity. You always look for that next person. You always look for the next thing that can happen to you, and that's really important, and that's how my adventure started at Apple.